Happy Thursday, Friday Eve as it were. See, I think, thanks Druid. Let me move some stuff around here. So I'm sorry I wasn't here on Monday. I just had a headache, like the worst headache. And I think it's from sort of allergy related things because of the smoke coming down and whatnot. It just kind of, I feel like it snowballed, and by Monday I was just like, ugh. So anyway, feeling better now. The smoke is cleared out for the time being. I truly hope my Canadian friends are okay. But yeah, it really, really stinks for that smoke to be down here. So, this week I have sort of just a potpourri of things that I've just been looking at and reading, and so I thought I would just share those with you. So first of all, my son and I went thrift shopping the other day, and it's kind of one of those things we've always done, probably since he was, I don't know, middle school. Since he had like pocket money to spend, we would go to thrift stores and junk stores and stuff like that. And he loves to search for things and collect things. So he's like, hey, we haven't done it in a while. Let's go thrift shopping. And I was like, all right. And that's probably what did me in, because I was out all day on Sunday. But anyway, I found a pair of jeans, which is awesome. And they cost like $4, $3.50, something like that. That in and of itself was the most fantastic thing that happened to me. But I don't know if you shop at thrift stores or not, but the bigger ones like Goodwill, Savers, they do this thing where all of like the little things, like all the little minutia, they bag it up and they staple a price tag on it and they hang it all on this pegboard wall. And I think that's pretty consistent with Savers. And I've been to some other big like regional places that do the exact same thing. And it's like all the little doodads that, you know, they're not going to price and put out, you know, on display, but they just cram it into bags. And I always look, because every now and then I find something that's really good. Most of the time it's junk, like used birthday candles and random chalk. But I found something, and I told my husband the other night, I was so excited when I got home with it and I showed him, and he's like, whatever. But I was like, this is the most exciting $4 I've ever spent. So here's the bag, and I thought I would open it with you. It is a clear bag. I do kind of know what's in here, but I thought I would share the excitement of an unboxing. I haven't done that in a while. And then I just have several articles to read to you that I thought would be interesting. And then, of course, we've got America's printed and painted fabrics to work on. So let us jump right into the unboxing. I didn't set my camera up very well for this, but I'll hold everything up. So $3.99. So first out of the bag is this lovely artificial grapes. In pretty good condition, considering they're from a thrift store. I don't know what I'll do with these. I do have several vintage hats that probably this would be very cute on. So, you know, I'll keep it in my basket of what do I do with this stuff. Also, a small feather butterfly. That can kind of go in the, I might do something artistic with this. All right, so this is probably going in the back to Goodwill box. A small resin fairy statue. I mean, she's cute, but I don't necessarily have room for this. So I see a lot of these at the thrift store. The Christmas ones, the fairies, the gnomes. The back of her dress looks like it's broken. Maybe not. Maybe that's just the way it's cast. I don't know. Sorry, fairy. You're gonna probably leave here. I think this is what I think it is. You guys know what this is? It actually looks like this. I've never had one of these, but I sure could use one. So what this is is you hang your purse from it. So if you're in a restaurant and they don't have a hook or something, or you have an extra chair to put your purse in, you don't have to put it on the floor. You hang this from the edge of the table and then your purse from here. And it's like one of those counterbalance situations where this is a good thing to have. I've never had one before. All right. Okay, so the three other things that are in here were the reason I bought this. So first of all, there are these little glass animals. Oh, and these two came in a magnifier, a little magnifier thing. But I used to have a bunch of these when I was little, and I honestly don't know where they came from, but this one, I guess, is a dog? I can't even hold him in a way that you'll be able to see him. I guess it's a little dog, and he's kind of sitting up, or kangaroo. He doesn't have a long tail, though. It's just like a little curly tail. So I'm guessing this is a little dog. Okay. That's cute, you know. Good for my miniatures collection. You never know. The other one I know is a dragon. Look how teeny tiny it is. Look how itty bitty. A little glass dragon. So tiny. A wiener dog. Yeah, that's what it looks like to me, but it's like he's sitting up, because if you put him down on all fours, his face is straight down. So I guess he's like, you know. And then I think this other thing. Look at this teeny tiny box. Something in it. I think it might be another glass animal, but I'm not sure. It is. This box! I mean, look at that. How delightful is that? Oh, this might be the best one of all. And if you can see it, oh, it's a tiny cobra. Oh, a tiny glass cobra. Oh my gosh, I mean, look at that. What an absurd thing. Adorable. Okay, so 3 little glass animals. And then the real thing I saw in here is the true antique. Is this. So it's a little pair of moccasins, leather, and they are on a string that is attached to this little card, this little tag. And this little card is actually, at the time, during those touristy years of the 1920s-ish, 1920s, 1930s, you could literally send this to somebody. 1.5 cent postage stamp. So apparently, so during this time period, and this is something I just recently read, during this time period, you could mail, like this touristy time period, like when cars are becoming ubiquitous, people have them, you know, this is like the 20s through the 30s. And, you know, the tourist, you know, traveling was kind of a thing, you know, it was new. People had this newfound freedom. They could get places quickly. They didn't have to worry about a horse. They could use a car. And so, you know, these roadside attractions became very popular. And the Native Americans of various areas, rightly so, capitalized on that. So the little card, and it doesn't say exactly where this is from. It just says greetings. It doesn't have a, it doesn't have like a place. It says, a lucky pair of moccasins. I surely hope they'll fit. They're all the rage around this place, so I know they'll make a hit. And then there's this little, like a little drawing of a Native American woman, obviously very, I don't want to say that this is inappropriate necessarily, but it is kind of, I don't know, this stuff is a little tacky. When I wouldn't put this necessarily in the same category as some other stuff in our past, like some of like the, the blackface kind of stuff, and some of like the very awful racist stuff that I saw. When I was traveling in the Midwest, I ran across this whole set of postcards that were, it was looking at cotton plantations. And I mean, if it was well after the emancipation, so it was probably pushing into the 20th century. But oh my gosh, the pictures and the captions were just absolutely racist. I was horrified. And I was like, oh my God, like burn this stuff, I don't feel like these kind of things exactly rise to that level, but they are a little, a little tacky. But I do know like the reservations and some of the tourist attractions, like, they made this stuff for tourist purchase. So, you'd have to remember that this was something that was determined by the Native Americans. But the reason when I saw this and I knew it was like real legitimate antique, so first of all, this 1.5 cents, once upon a time, you could mail things just randomly like this. The postal service would handle this. And this 1.5 cents, postcard postage was never 1.5 cents, but they created a Warren G. Harding stamp in the 20s. I think it was around 1925, specifically for stuff like this. So it was a 1.5 cent stamp so you could mail these things. And the reason I know this is because I researched an item that I've had in my collection for a really long time, and that's this. It's called a skookum, and this one is from Tuscarora Summit, Pennsylvania. This one was actually mailed. So I have the Warren G. Harding stamp is on there. This is from Mama. And it was sent to Miss Mary Liz, I think it says Renner. And Mount something, Iowa is the address. And the fact that this amount of address gets it to its recipient, presumably, surprised me. But I have had this thing forever. I've actually always kept it in a plastic bag because it's covered in dust. And I've gotten some of the dust off, but like the little feather in his hair is very bedraggled and dusty, and I don't want to damage it, so I've kind of just always had it in this plastic bag. But in any event, very cute. He's on this little backboard thing. But again, it's sort of tacky, kind of touristy stuff. But it makes you think of a time when people were enjoying this kind of newfound freedom, and I often think of it as it's probably a little bit like, when people really picked up on air travel, like in the 60s, for vacations, 50s and 60s. So, it's a piece of Americana. It's not necessarily something that, people are long time proud of, but it is a tchotchke that is kind of indicative of our past. So I was kind of excited to find these. Because legitimate antique. So, you never know what you're going to find in a thrift store. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do with these glass animals. They're so tiny. I need a little tiny shelf for them for my dollhouse. I have to work on that. All right. So, moving right along. So, the very first thing I wanted to, I put it in the middle of the title here, is the Lowell Offering. And it is something that I've been meaning to, I kind of had it on my list of, things to passively research. I don't necessarily have anything specific about, Lowell and the Lowell Offering that I want to necessarily know about. But very quickly, the history, the Lowell Offering was a periodical or like a magazine put out by the mill girls in Lowell. And what was happening in sort of, I guess, after the Civil War, New England was really trying to capture, they were really trying to catch up and make the mills very profitable. And so they started this thing called the Lowell system. And the guy who started, his last name was Lowell, like the city in Massachusetts is named after him. he started this, I think, elsewhere, and then brought it to Lowell. And so basically what it was is they set up, they set up these mills, and they attracted workers from farms. So the daughters of farmers, and they would, bring them to the city, and they would live in these dormitories, or boarding houses, and they'd work at the mill, and then, they were kind of cared for at the boarding house. They supposedly hired respectable widows to be like the boarding house, like like the mom, like the room mother kind of thing, and it worked very well for some time. From what I understand, the girls, they were expected, they had a curfew, they were expected to go to church. They were expected to save some of their money, their salary. But then it kind of all fell apart, as things do. Great ideas sometimes don't always work out. And conditions, the working conditions got to be a problem, etc. And so that's when we kind of get into labor unions, but we're not going to go down that road today. What I really want to look at is the fact that these girls were not dummies. These girls were educated in many cases, or in some cases, I guess. I can't speak for all of them, but enough of them are educated, and they were, they were smart women. They were not frivolous. They had, really great ideas, and could write very well. And so they created this publication, like I said. And I want to say it was published... and this is actually, I said Civil War, but this is actually before the Civil War. This was like 1840s, I think. So this is well before the Civil War. I don't know why I said the Civil War. So like 1840 to 1845, I think, is when it was published. It was only for a few years, but it's a lot of content in the Lowell Offering. Well, the one I wanted to read specifically is the one entitled The Patchwork Quilt. And I found out about this particular article from the book that we are reading over on Quilt Nerding, which is the American Quilt by Roderick Karakoff. And he briefly talks about, the mills and the Lowell girls, and mentions this particular article. It's a few pages long, and the woman's or girl's name is Annette. We don't know anything else about her. We don't know her last name. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. And then I've got a couple things out of Quilters Newsletter magazine to look at. So, all right. Get this so I can read it. This is from 1940, or no, not 19, 18. I can't get any dates right today. 1845 is the date that this was published. And it is entitled The Patchwork Quilt. The patchwork quilt. There it is, in the inner sanctum of my old maid's hall, as cozy a little room as any lady need wish to see, attached to her boudoir, and gloomy only from the name attached to it, for there is much in a name. And the merriest peal of laughter, if echoed from an old maid's hall, seems like the knell of girlhood hopes. Yes, there is the patchwork quilt. Looking to the uninterested observer like a miscellaneous collection of odd bits and ends of calico. But to me it is a precious reliquary of past treasures, a storehouse of valuables, almost destitute of intrinsic worth, a herbarium of withered flowers, a bound volume of hieroglyphics, each of which is a key to some painful or pleasant remembrance, a symbol of... But I am poetizing and spiritualizing over my patchwork quilt. Gentle friends, it contains a piece of each of my childhood calico gowns, and of my mother's and sister's, and that is not all, I must tell you, and then you will not wonder that I have chosen for this entertainment my patchwork quilt. It is one of my earliest recollections, and that of the memorable period when I emerged from babyhood to childhood. The commencement of this patchwork quilt. I was learning to sew. She uses a lot of exclamation points. A girl after my own heart, but nonetheless, I'm like, ah! You have to have some exuberance. Oh, the exultations, the aspirations, the hopes, the fears, the mortifications, the perseverance. In short, all moral emotions and valuable qualities and powers were brought out in this grand achievement, the union of some little shreds of calico. And can I ever forget the long-suffering patience and forbearance of my kind mother? Her smiles and words of encouragement and sympathy, her generosity in the donation of calico bits, her marvelous ingenuity in joining together pieces of all shapes so that they could result in a perfect square. Parents, never purchase for your children mathematical puzzles. You can teach them and amuse them by making patchwork. Nor must I forget the beautiful brass thimble that my father gave me, with the assurance that if I never would lose it, he would one day give me one of silver. Nor the present of the kind old lady who expressed her gratification over my small stitches by a red broadcloth strawberry, which was introduced to me as an emery bag. An emery bag! So many exclamation points. Its office and function were all to be learned. How much there was that I did not know. But when I had so far learned to sew, that 5 minutes interval of rest and triumph did not occur between every 2 stitches. The strenuous application by which I drove the perspiration from every pore of the hand soon taught me the value of the emery bag. Oh, what a heroine was I in driving the stitches! What a martyr under the pricks and inflictions of the needle, which often sent the blood from my fingers, but could not force a tear from my eyes. These are all exclamation points. These were the first lessons in heroism and fortitude. How much, too, I learned of the world's generosity in rewarding the efforts of the industrious and enterprising. How many pieces in that quilt were presented because I could sew and did sew, and was such an adept in sewing? What predictions that I should be noted. What predictions that I should be a noted seamstress? I think that's supposed to be seamstress, but I'm guessing this is an older version of it. SEMPSTRESS. Unless it's a typo of some sort, which I don't think it is. It's seamstress. That I should soon be able to make shirts for my father, sheets for my mother, and nobody knows what not for little brothers and sisters. What legends were told me of little girls who had learned patchwork at 3 years of age and could put a shirt together at 6. No kidding. No kidding, Annette. We've heard about them too. And we're gobsmacked. What magical words were gusset, felling, buttonhole stitch, and so forth. Each a sesame, opening into an arcana of workmanship, through and beyond which I could see embroidery, hemstitch, openwork, tambour, and a host of magical beauties. What predictions that I could someday earn my living by my needle. Predictions, alas, that have most signally failed. Well, she's working in a mill. Maybe by 1940 or 18. Oh, I keep saying 1845. We don't know if it was so good then. Here also are the remembrances of another memorable period, the days when the child emerged into girlhood, when the mind expanded beyond the influence of calico patchwork and was laid aside for more important occupations. Oh, what a change was there! Exclamation point. Once there could have been nothing more important. Now the patchwork was almost beneath my notice. But there was another change. Muslin and lace, with cloths of more common texture, had long occupied my attention when my thoughts and efforts were returned to my patchwork quilt. What do I remember the boy who waited upon me home from singing school 6 times running? I do not mean that he waited running, but that he escorted me home 6 times in succession. What girl would not, under such circumstances, have resumed her patchwork quilt? But how stealthily it was done. Hitherto, the patchwork joys had been enhanced by the sympathy, praises, and assistance of others, but now they were cherished in secrecy and silence. But the patchwork quilt bears witness to one of the first lessons upon the vanity of youthful hopes, the mutability of earthly wishes, and And anybody might accompany me home 600 times now, and such attentions would never be succeeded by a renewal of those patchwork hopes. Well do I remember the blushes of painful consciousness with which I met my sister's eye when she broke into my sanctuary and discovered my employment. By these alone might my secret have been discovered. So I'll stop there for a second because Druid has some details. So a sempstress, it's hard to say. So also spelled seamstress, is an older or less common variation of seamstress, which refers to a woman whose occupation is sewing, making, or mending clothes. The term highlights the deep tradition of women's historical and temporary contributions to garment making. We use the term sewist in these modern times. Yep, that's what I thought, but good to confirm. Okay. But how many passages of my life seem to be epitomized in this patchwork quilt? Here is the piece intended for the center, a star, as I called it, the rays of which are remnants of that bright copperplate cushion which graced my mother's easy chair. Copperplate, if you're following along on Tuesdays, you know what copperplate printing looks like. And here is a piece of that radiant cotton gingham dress, which was purchased to wear to the dancing school. Oh, so she goes to singing school and dancing school. So again, like, these are girls that they're not some country bumpkin girls. These girls were educated and, you know, kind of did what educated women were allowed to do at that time. I have not forgotten the almost supernatural exertions by which I attempted to finish it in due season for the first night, nor how my mantua maker, with pious horror, endeavored as strenuously to disappoint me. And by the way, a mantua maker is basically just a dressmaker. Mantuas are kind of an older term for these specific kind of gown, sort of made out of like big squares that are tucked, and you know they're supposedly like a little bit easier to make than things that a tailor would make. So nor how my mantua maker with pious horror endeavored as strenuously to disappoint me. But spite of her, it was finished, and she was guiltless. Finished all but the neck binding, and I covered that with my little embroidered cape. Here is a piece of the first dress I ever saw, cut with what were called mutton leg sleeves. 1830s. It was my sister's, and what a marvelous fine fashion we all thought that was. Here, too, is a remnant of the first bishop sleeve my mother wore. I think those are the like wide sleeves. And here is a fragment of the first gown that was ever cut for me with a bodice waist. So something that, you know, comes in narrowly in the waist. Was there ever so graceful, beautiful pointed a fashion for women's waists before? Never, in my estimation. By this fragment, I remember the gown with wings on the shoulders, in which I supposed myself to look truly angelic. And oh, down in this corner, a piece of that in which I first felt myself a woman. That is, when I first discarded pantalettes. So pantalettes were like bloomers, basically, a kind of long, sort of, like little girls, like what little girls would wear. They kind of would have lace at the bottom, and they'd stick out from under their dresses. Oh, yep. So Druid has the leg of mutton sleeve, so also known as a gigot sleeve. It is a voluminous sleeve characterized by a drastic puff or gathering of fabric. So yeah, they're those ones that are like, poof. And in the 1830s, they not only were like big and dramatic, the way the necklines were made, it came out like the opening of the neckline would come out really far. And like the way that it's cut, like you really couldn't lift your arms up like this. Like you probably could barely put your arms out like kind of like straight, right? Because the way that it, you know, it would like kind of grab your arm. They did come back at the turn of the century. So like 1890s, the big sleeve came back. It was a little bit different. But nonetheless, it was often just in blouses at that point, because like the Gibson girls, you know, if you think about that. Let's see. The concept of heavily exaggerated sleeves was popularized by the 19th century Renaissance. I'm sorry, the 16th century Renaissance. The true leg of mutton emerged in two major fashion waves. Oh, okay. 1820s and 30s, sleeves ballooned out to dramatic proportions, supported by internal stiffeners, down or horsehair. So yeah, they would actually can literally have these little bands around their arms that had like almost like a little down pillow that was underneath these things. And then 1890s, the style resurfaced as an iconic part of the Victorian era, creating an hourglass look when paired with corsets and full skirts. Yeah. So 1890s, it could be a dress, or more often it was like a shirt waist and a long, like a long skirt. So, oh, hello. Def Calion? Oh, or Defka Lion. Sorry if I'm messing up your screen name. So welcome. Okay, so back to the story. So she first discarded her pantalettes, and like I said, those are those little, like bloomers, but little girls wore them. I think little boys did too, up to a certain age. Okay, here is a fragment of the beautiful gingham of which I had so scanty a pattern, and thus taxed my dressmaker's wits. And here a piece of that which mother and all my sisters had one with me. Wonderful coincidence of taste and opportunity to gratify it. Here is a piece of that morning dress in which I thought my mother looked so graceful, and here one of that which should have been warranted not to wash, or to wash all white. So I'm wondering if it was something that got like dye stained or something. Here is a fragment of the pink apron which I ornamented so tastefully with tape trimming, and here a piece of that which was pointed all around. Here is a token of kindness in the shape of a square of the old brocade-looking calico, presented by a venerable friend, and here a piece given by the naughty little girl with whom I broke friendship, and then wished to take it out of its place, an act of vengeance, opposed by my then forbearing mother. On this occasion, I thought too forbearing. Can you imagine? Like, you get a scrap of fabric from somebody to put in your quilt, and then you, like, break up your friendship, and you're like, I'm going to have to just dig that right out of the quilt. I don't know that I would tear apart a quilt just to get a piece of fabric out from somebody that I didn't like. Here's the fabric of the first dress which baby brother wore when he left off long clothes. And here are relics of the long clothes themselves. And I think that by that she means those really long dresses that they put babies in. And essentially, like, before a baby could walk, like anything long, they just kind of wrap it around the baby. And then they boys and girls then transitioned to like these kind of shorter dresses and these little pantalettes. And then the little boys then would go to these like skeleton suits, or which is basically like a top that buttons into the pants, and then they would go on to like regular men's clothing as they reached their kind of preteen years, I guess. Here, a piece of that pink gingham frock, which for him was so splendidly decked with pearl buttons, and here a piece of that for which he was so unthankful, for he thought he was big enough to wear something more substantial than calico frocks. Can you imagine being a little boy and having to wear a dress? I mean, it's so foreign to us today to think of this, but in that time period, I mean, you think of little kids like, potty training and all that kind of stuff, and they didn't have easy cleanup. So having children, babies, boy or girl, wear dresses for the first few years of their life just made sense, Oops. Here is a piece of that calico which so admirably imitated vesting, and my mother, economical from necessity, bought it to make waistcoats for the boys. Here are pieces of what I thought so bright and beautiful to set off my quilt with, and bought strips of it by the cent's worth, strips more in accordance with the good dealer's benevolence than her usual price for the calico. Here is a piece of the first dress which was ever earned by my own exertions. What a feeling of exultation, of self-dependence, of self-reliance was created by this effort. What expansion of mind! What awakening of dormant powers! She's really feeling it. Wellington was not prouder when he gained the field of Waterloo. You know, Wellington, the Duke of Wellington, we talked about him recently. When he gained the field of Waterloo than I was in that gown. The belle, who purchases her dresses with the purse her father has always filled, knows not of the triumphant beatings of my heart upon this occasion, meaning she worked for it. And I might now select the richest silk without that honest, heartfelt joy. And to do for myself, to earn my own living, to meet my daily expenses with my own daily toil, is now a task quite deprived of its novelty, and time has robbed it of some of its pleasure. And here are patterns presented by kind friends, and illustrative of their tastes, but enough for you. Then was another era in the history of my quilt. My sister, 3 years younger than myself, was in want of patchwork, while mine lay undisturbed, with no prospect of being ever called from its repository. Yes, she was to be married, and I not spoken for. There was an exclamation point there. She was to be taken, and I left. I gave her the patchwork. It seemed like a transference of girlish hopes and aspirations, or rather a finale to them all. Girlhood had gone, and I was a woman. I felt this more than I had ever felt it before, for my baby sister was to be a wife. We arranged it into a quilt. These were pleasant hours in which I sympathized so strongly in all her hopes that I made them mine. Then came the quilting, a party not soon to be forgotten, with its jokes and merriment. Here is the memento of a mischievous brother who was determined to assist, otherwise than by his legitimate occupation of rolling up the quilt as it was finished, snapping the chalk line, passing thread, wax, and scissors, and shaking and shaking hands across the quilt for all girls with short arms. Girls with short arms. He must take the thread and needle. Well, we gave him white thread and appointed him to a very dark piece of calico so that we might pick it out easier. That's funny. But there, to spite us, he did it so nicely that it still remains, a memento of his skill with the needle, there in that corner of the patchwork quilt. And why did the young bride exchange her snowy counterpane for the patchwork quilt? Those dark stains at the top of it will tell. Stains left by the night medicines, taken in silence and darkness, as though to let another know of her pains and remedies would make her sickness more real. As though disease would stay his hand if met so quietly and repulsed so gently. The patchwork quilt rose and fell with the heavings of her breast as she sighed in the still night over the departing joys of youth, of health, of newly wedded life. Though the bridal chamber rang the knell-like cough which told us that we must prepare for her an early grave, the patchwork quilt shrouded her wasted form as she sweetly resigned herself to the arms of death, and fell with the last low sigh which breathed forth her gentle spirit, then settled upon the lovely form, now stiffening, cold, and lifeless. And back to me, with all its memories of childhood, youth, and maturer years, its associations of joy and sorrow, of smiles and tears, of life and death, has returned to me the patchwork quilt. And that is signed Annette. So I didn't know it was going to be so very sad, but I think it's really kind of a beautiful thing that she wrote, you know, because I mean, this is how often people can look at quilts. Now, you know, today many quilters will go out and buy their favorite fabric line and their favorite pattern, or they'll see somebody make a cool quilt and they'll want to go get the pattern. And, you know, of course that always in antiquity happened as well. You know, granted their purchase power was a little different and their patterns were generally shared among friends. They couldn't necessarily purchase patterns. But, you know, it's still that idea, that's kind of still that same idea. But in so many cases where you are reusing household fabrics, you know, I mean, like, you look at this. This is the kind of thing where, you know, these are scraps that could have come from dressmaking, clothing making. This piece I'm thinking is probably from the 50s. So we definitely still have a lot of, you know, home economics going on, people making things. This one also, by the way, has a feed sack on the back. I just acquired this yesterday. And it's very cute. I'm going to take pictures, and I'll post them so that you guys can see. But it's just this idea of this is just, I don't know. It's like kind of near and dear to my heart. So, okay. So let's see. I have missed some comments. What do we have here? Okay. So Truman says, there is no official or former grammar term for the overuse of exclamation points. But people often use the slang terms bangeria or punctomania. I love that. So bangeria is humorous slang word combining bang, printer slang for an exclamation point, and oria, a medical suffix meaning excessive flow. Ew. Punctomania, a playful term used online to describe a wild or crazy attachment to punctuation marks, like exclamation points. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously compared it to laughing at your own joke. Terry Pratchett wrote in his books that 5 exclamation marks, the sure sign of an insane mind. I know that I am a bad exclamation point overuser because it's like I don't know, it's sometimes hard to portray appropriate emotion in written word. And especially today, when we're like so overburdened in communication, just becomes problematic. So I'm always like, hi guys, I'm always trying to write like I speak. And yeah, it does come across as kind of like you're crazy, So, yeah, I've often heard, anybody who ever watched Seinfeld, there was that, because, Elaine Bennis was an editor, and it's one of the later episodes where she's editing her boyfriend's book, her boyfriend Jake Jarmel, and he takes a message for her, which is one of her friends had a baby, and it was just, Mary had the baby, and the note did not include an exclamation point. And so they get into this huge, massive argument, and I think they break up over it, about why he would not have put an exclamation point after, hey, somebody had a baby. So then she went back and edited his manuscript with lots of exclamation points, and so it's very funny. All right, let's move on to the next thing. You write to another person with punctomania, but not when you write an essay. Yeah, I think that when you're writing something that's kind of like an essay or something more serious, yeah, you have to be judicious. All right, so let us look at, before we get to variable star, let's look at Wilda Northrop, because I was not familiar with her, and she's very interesting. I did not take a picture. I forgot to take a picture of these 2 Quilters Newsletter magazines, but this first one that we're going to look at, Wilda Northrop, this is the March 1984 issue. So, sorry I forgot to take a picture, but this is what it looks like. Pretty 80s looking, if you ask me. No surprise there. Like that wicker bedroom set. I know I had lots of friends with that wicker bedroom set. It was very popular in the 70s, I think. Okay, so this is the meet and place column, and usually that is about just sort of looking at a particular quilt maker. In this case, and I don't know that Wilda makes quilts, but you'll see in a moment. So let me show you my other screen. So this is a picture of Wilda Northrop with one of her quilts, paintings, and her cat, Emily. I don't know if Emily is the cat's name or Emily's the person who took the picture, but I'm guessing Emily's the cat's name. So Wilda is a painter. So this is Wendy S. Howe introduces us to Wilda Northrop of Pacific Grove, California. Oh, Druid, oh, yeah. I have never, I did work in an editorial capacity at one time in one of my jobs. It was in the professional training though. So you know, I didn't necessarily, it was not writing for fun. So I guess I never had to deal with anything like that. There was never any word count necessarily, but that's funny. Tutoring writing. And the way that they meet the 600 word or 2-page minimum. Yeah. Use very, very, very a lot. Okay. So, Wilda. And this is, again, written by Wendy Howe. I don't know if she was like a staff writer or like... I can't remember if I've seen her name very often. So she might have just written in about this particular artist. So, okay. Wilda Northrop. It's been several years since I bought my first painting by Wilda Northrop. I bought it because it reminded me of my great aunt Glenn, who was a maiden lady. A maiden lady. Let's guess it's old. That's better than calling her an old maid. It shows the pensive face of an elderly woman superimposed upon a quilt. A postcard nearby reads, "Gertrude, I am sorry. Goodbye, Howard." The quilt is Old Maid's Puzzle. It's interesting, like a Dear John letter. The painting brought tears to my eyes because it made me remember the vague references to my great aunt and her, Boydell Mackenzie, and how brave she had been. So I'm guessing this must be a person that her aunt lost, perhaps. That maybe her significant other passed away and that's why they never got married. Wilda Northrop paints watercolors, and although she uses many different subjects, she always has a group of paintings in the works that are expressly for quilters and quilt lovers. All of her paintings evoke sentimental emotions, but her quilters' paintings are especially nostalgic. So let's kind of, I'm going to zoom in here. So this is cool. This is this Amish buggy kind of thing. I'm thinking this is a painting, not a picture. It's kind of hard to tell, honestly. It's either an old picture or a very, very, very good painting. And then this is the painting of the quilt, which is lovely. And you can tell that's watercolor, you know, but very lovely. I suspect this is probably a painting. It's kind of hard to tell, but yeah. And look, she's got like a quilted vest on. Wilda is a talented artist, and at the same time, she is a funny lady, irreverent and honest. When I asked her if she had always liked to draw, I got the expected yes for an answer, but she went on to explain that she hasn't always been good at it. Whenever we did art in elementary school, I always looked up at the drawings on the wall, and mine was always the worst. Never mind, Willa eventually made her way to the Art Center in Los Angeles. Mostly, as she tells it, because she wanted to pursue what she fancied was an exciting artist's life. From there, she began studies at Otis Art Institute, also in LA. Since Wilda's present paintings are always pretty, I assume she had started with that style in her student days. Not so. You have to remember that was in the 60s. She explained, you couldn't do anything beautiful. It had to be funny or sarcastic. That's interesting. So she worked with stuffed canvases, making figures, which she then painted and adorned with needlework. Well, at least she was working in fabric. Well, that's interesting. So she's using canvas, but she's painting on the canvas and needlework. I thought, that's interesting. I would like to see more of her work because these are all just paintings. Oh, let's look at a different painting. So this is another one. At the same time, Wilda had begun what she calls junking, going to flea markets, where she soon discovered that quilts were among her favorite finds. It became a game to see how much you could have for how little money. I bought things I needed, furniture, bowls, frames, old photos, and quilts. I never spent more than $15. Eventually, Wilda received her Master of Fine Arts degree, married, and had babies, and found no time for art. But she did find time for quilts. Okay, so she is a quilter. I had made a little quilt when I was 8. It was terrible. I started out with small squares, and nobody could tell me what I was supposed to do. I got sick of making little squares, so I started cutting bigger ones. It just grew and grew. Now her quilts were for her children. And when she moved to Pacific Grove, California in 1974, she began to take her quilting seriously. She helped organize the first Heritage Society quilt show in 1976. In fact, she designed the whole show. She joined a quilting group and worked on quilting some old quilt tops, eventually starting to make more quilts of her own. At the time, she recalls, I still wasn't painting. But in 1978, she was asked to come up with a logo for the new Wild Goose Chase quilt shop, as well as to design and paint their signs. And Wilda found herself drawn back into the world of painting. She started working in watercolors because they're easy to clean up and because you can start a painting, stop to put in the wash, change the baby, answer the phone, and then pick up the painting again. At first, she did paintings of her 3 children, but soon she had an urge to paint quilts. She did the work described at the beginning of this article and found it so well received that she did more in that style. And we'll look at more of them in a second. I love the fact that these are essentially like collages almost on top of, or they're like, it's sort of like an object inventory. I mean, this looks like a photograph, a postcard. I'm not sure what this is, but this is like a little cabinet photo. Some kind of little tchotchke or something. Maybe perfume. Can't tell. But then this beautiful quilt behind it. I love that. That is so cool. That's so unique. Where did I leave off? Perhaps best described as painted collages, I just said, the watercolors told stories, sometimes funny, often sad. At the same time, she rediscovered all those postcards she had collected while junking and started using them in her paintings as well. Most of the collage paintings included a quilt or a scrap of one, and they appealed tremendously to the quilters who attended her first show in 1979, irreverently, I really can't talk today, irreverently called My Last Chance to Make It Before I'm 40. Good grief, I know that feeling. Since that time, quilts have figured prominently in most of Wilda's work. Much of her current work depicts Amish quilts and buggies, and as usual, the paintings evoke a nostalgia for earlier days when life was pretty and slow and women's worlds were filled with quilts. So I thought this one was really cool. But this whole collage of them, I mean, look at this. So this is a double wedding ring quilt with this painting of a couple, and then you look at the centers of all of them have these other pictures, and so like there's a story there, you know, like, is this the bride, you know, is this the bride throughout her life, is this, you know, this family, I don't know. So Amish buggy and Ohio Star quilt. So yeah, it looks like all of the buggies she did paint those, they're not pictures. This one I think is really cool because of just all the objects laid out. Things Ethel kept in a locked drawer. Well, there's a story there too. Yeah, so recipes, a little bottle, a doily, glasses, buttons, and a key, a postcard. I'm assuming that with better resolution, like if you see these in person, you could actually read but it's hard to read the writing on these. This lovely cabinet card. Oh, okay. So this one is the grandmother's flower garden with a quilt block on top. That's pretty cool. Here's another one. This, it looks like, really tries to capture the quilting in this Amish quilt. And I mean, you can kind of see that sinewy feather border. You know, if you've seen an Amish quilt, you know exactly what she's getting at here. And then the horse and buggy. Did you know that the buggies like this versus the buggies that are the enclosed ones, different things? Not all communities use one or the other. Sometimes their buggies are different colored, the tops of them, different colors. So this one is called Double Wedding Ring. And this one, oops, I guess my photo, Amish Buggy and 9-patch quilt. So very cool. I was just not aware of her. And, as I was flipping through, I look at my Quilters Newsletter magazines a lot, just revisiting stuff and looking for tidbits, of research. And, just coming across her info, I was like, oh, her stuff is really cool. I know that there are a couple of other painters in printmakers that have done quilty stuff throughout the ages. I know my mom had one, and I can't remember what the person's name is. It's not this lady. But in any event, I'd like to go out and see, is she still around? What's her work look like now? Is she still painting? What other stuff did she do? So I have to add that to my list. All right, moving right along. I told you it's a potpourri today. So bear with me one sec. And get back to... So I went to a quilt study yesterday, and our theme was Stars and Stripes. And of course, I took it literally. I brought a bicentennial project that I've been working on. But I suspected a lot of people would also bring star quilts and things like that. And I wasn't wrong. So this really stuck out to me this morning while I was flipping through some things. And I thought, yeah, let's take a look at some stars. So the article is called The Great American Quilt Classics Variable Star. So I think this was probably a series. And let me see who wrote this. I think this is probably a Bonnie Lehman. Yeah, there's no sign off, so I would assume this is by Bonnie Lehman unless I see something here that says otherwise. Okay, so real quick, before I forget, this is from February of 1983. So this is that. This was one of my mother's. I know from the sticker. She bought it at the Sewing and Vacuum Center in my town when I grew up. Really pretty quilt on the front. Right? Okay, so let's read about the variable star. And so this starts off with a quote from good old Florence Pito. Among the heavenly bodies, those known as variables are so called because they show distinct changes in brightness from time to time. Oh, so variable stars are a celestial thing? An astronomical? An astronomical thing. So because they show distinct changes in brightness from time to time. So in patchwork, accent and coloring gave to this much used and easily assembled pattern a versatility which led to its apt name. Florence Pito, Antiques magazine, July 1942. Variable is a perfect name for this early star pattern. Not only does its name change as the nation's history unfolds and the pattern moves westward, but also the coloring and the set can be changed to create an almost infinite variety when designing with this simply constructed pattern. And I apologize, this picture is very dark. The magazine picture is very dark. I think they probably adjusted lighting to try and get the quilting design, I think. It's either the quilting design or the fabric. Yeah, it looks like it's actually the fabric they were trying to... Because I can't even see a quilting design in here. So, yeah. My guess is that this is probably the background is probably white fabric or a white-ish fabric, light colored. I don't think it's gray. And that it has some kind of like little dot on it. So, okay. The variable star first appeared during the last quarter of the 18th century, usually as a single motif at the border corners on framed square quilts. While most of these medallion-style quilts were from New England, one notable exception was a quilt made by Martha Washington in Virginia in 1785. And she notes that that quilt is shown in Safford and Bishop's American Quilts and Coverlets. It's also shown in a bunch of other books by this point. Because remember, this is 1983. Not until the early 1800s did the variable star appear as a quilt pattern on its own right. So, okay, before the early 1800s, it was just a corner thing. Just for corners. And like many designs from that era, usually it was set with alternating plain blocks. Linsey Woolsey quilts in the variable star pattern were generally made in two solid bright colors, while those made from cottons often combined a multitude of prints for the star, along with a brightly patterned chintz or roller print in the alternating plain squares. When Dolly Madison's effervescent personality filled the White House in the early 1800s, one of the variations on this pattern was given her name. The Dolly Madison star, which, we'll see it in a minute. Let's actually get there. So this is the Dolly Madison star. So this is the traditional one. This is what one she just mentioned. And this is the Dolly Madison star. So the Dolly Madison star is a two-color pattern that has the same general design lines as variable star, but each triangle has been further divided into 4 small triangles, and the center square is made from a 9 patch. By 1840, when William Henry Harrison is my grandmother's maiden name. I guess she's on my mind today. When William Henry Harrison was running for the presidency under the slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, the original variable star pattern took on a new set and used the slogan for its name. In this set, the variable stars were sewn together in long vertical strips, which were then combined with rows of solid color strips in the English strippy style. So just columns, just rows, right? From top to bottom. So those aren't rows, those are columns, but so it's strips. In the East, especially in New England, this popular pattern retained its old name of variable star. As it moved westward, it gained the name Ohio star. And I think today, most people, like especially contemporary quilters, if you were to ask them, what's this called? They're going to probably say Ohio star, because it's, Missouri Star quilters, like that's their logo. Like people just kind of know it as Ohio star. So it was gained the name Ohio star and was generally seen with a white or very light colored star against a darker background. In 1844, just a few years after the Tippecanoe and Tyler too campaign, the American public was occupied with the question of annexing Texas, and the variable star became known as Texas or the Lone Star, according to Ruth Finley in Old Patchwork Quilts. Now, we remember Ruth Finley, her book was full of nonsense. So... honestly, what we really often say today, a lone star is one of the big stars that are made up of diamonds. It's either a lone star or a Star of Bethlehem. I don't know if I've seen the Texas Lone Star. I'm not sure. Quilt pattern names or block names are so like, it's like a moving target sometimes. So quilts with this name often had a single square in the center rather than the usual square in a square. So yeah, you can see how you turn the square in the middle on point versus having it, have this other, it's basically an economy block, like what we would know today as an economy block, this here on point, and then you've got your points of the star, whereas this is just a square on point. By the 1930s, the Nancy Page quilt column in the newspapers also gave variable star the names Western Star and Star of Hope. The setting with alternate plain blocks continued to be popular for variable star quilts throughout the first half of the 19th century, whether the blocks were set straight or on the diagonal. By the 1870s and 80s, there was some movement towards changing this style. Several variable star quilts were then set with sashing, either with or without setting squares, and sometimes the design was set with zigzag sashing. So before we move on, let's see, look at this one. This one I think is lovely. This is modern, obviously made around the time the magazine was published, certainly based on the colors. But look at this quilting in there, you know, and I think this is so very like historically focused, so that like your alternating blocks are for the quilting. You know, you've got your piecing and then you've got your quilting, and they're there to set each other off. That's very, you know, that's kind of like the historical way of quilting. These are very beautiful. Okay, keep looking at that. The variable star within variable star shown on our cover. Was this oh, you know what? It was. I didn't even realize. Let me go back to me for a minute so we can see this again. I didn't even pay that much attention. I was just like, oh, pretty quilt. But you can see it's a star within a star. Kind of. But yes, it's a star within a star. Some of them, it's easier to like get your eyes adjusted to that. Okay. So the variable star within variable star shown on our cover is yet another example of how the simplicity of this pattern seems to lend itself to so many setting styles. And before I turn the page, this is 1982 by Nicole Boisseau of Paris. Nicole made each star look different by using variable light and dark prints. She alternated the simple pattern with trapunto, so those are stuffed, feathered circles. So that's amazing. So she not only... So this is a French quilter. So it looks like these, the feathers, the little plumage of the feathers appears to be stuffed. Even more impressive. Very cool. Okay. And the first one we looked at, I'll leave that out. That one is, let's see, this is 1870, made by Lavinia McConnell, New London, Ohio. This quilt is in the Quilts and Carousels show in Oberlin, Ohio during May and June, so in 83. That was hanging. Yeah, so that was just giving info about that quilt show. Okay. And so now I'll move it along to the actual info about construction. So, so she goes on to say, we show a quilt by Nicole Boisseau that vividly echoes the 1885 cover quilt in a modern version, lending credence to Jonathan Holstein's supposition in The Pieced Quilt, an American design tradition, that such a design is invented over and over again by artisans who begin with the square as the basis for a pieced design. Of the variable star, he writes, it can be found in Roman and Arabic mosaic floors and architectural decoration, Renaissance decorative inlay, marquetry on furniture, and the like. Its sustained popularity due to the convenience of working with the divisions of the square in techniques which require piecing together parts of contrasting colors. So, yeah, and the rest of this is about making it. And so these are the parts. Now today you would not make templates for this. You would cut this out, no doubt, with a rotary cutter. But you've got the square, you've got this half of A, and then B and half of D. So you've got it. They're telling you to cut these things on folds. Oh, that's annoying. I would not want to do that. I'm bad enough about cutting things out with a rotary cutter or even scissors that, I don't know, cutting stuff on folds can be troublesome. Okay, so let's look at this next. So this is showing the possibilities of the layout and how this changes depending on if you put this on point or not. Right? And these change. It looks like they're, you know, because it's not on point anymore, these are going to change. It messes with your mind so much when you sit and actually look at these and realize geometrically how they're different, you know, how the triangles have just been rotated, you know, and then it creates this, you know, at first glance you're like, oh, it's a star, no big deal. But once you start to like really like look in there, you're like, oh, okay, these things are turned. They're, you know, they're different. They're creating a different look and a different sizes of templates. You know, these squares, not the same size as this square. You couldn't use that. So that's the whole, I guess, the whole idea of D and B. This one is just A and B. This is A, B, C, and D to make this one. So this one's a little, I guess, according to this, a little bit more difficult because it's got extra pieces. I don't know. So what they say here is the variable star block is so easy to construct and offers so many design possibilities that you'll want to try your hand at inventing a new variation of such a venerable American quilt classic. Here we offer pattern pieces and piecing diagrams for 2 different blocks. You can arrange these blocks in a number of ways. Set straight or on the diagonal, with or without sashing strips or alternate plain blocks. So she kind of describes what's going to happen. She doesn't have great pictures. So I will just show you the fact that, you know, she talks about 2 different things here, whether you set them on point or you set them just as blocks, you know, regular block piecing. She describes 2 different things, and you know, you could literally put stars back to back to back in both of these, or you can alternate with a plain block. So I think that's what she's getting at. So yeah, I'm not great at triangles, right? And you know, when in my piecing, I'm an applique girl. I prefer anytime I can applique, but oops, in terms of piecing, triangles always get me because they're not as easy mathematically to think about as squares. Because, you know, squares like, you know, 4 inches by 4 inches. Okay, I'm going to add a 1/2 inch to it to account for a 1/4 inch all the way around. Dunzo, easy. But triangles operate a little differently. And so, you know, your triangle needs to be a little bit bigger if you're going to cut a square, you know, diagonally to create triangles. It needs to be bigger than you necessarily think it does. So you have to, you know, there's some mathematics that go into that. And again, like I said, this just taking these very simple, you know, half square triangles and turning them, they do different things. They do different things in creating the star. So I realize that that's like a very simple, like, duh. But I had not really sat and looked, you know, at 2 different, you know, stars like this together, and really thought much about it. So now we have. You're welcome. So I hope you've learned something on that one. Okay. And so we move on to our book. And I feel like I have not been giving Florence, I've been giving her short shrift. So first of all, I mentioned on Instagram, so if you follow me on Instagram, you may have seen this. What did you say? Waste of fabric. Okay, you quilt to recycle begins with limited pieces. Yeah, so like if you're just taking like, you gotta literally just cut a triangle out of a scrap. Yeah, you can end up with waste. But the most economical way to cut triangles is to start with squares and, you know, cut your squares in half. One of the other problems with triangles is no matter what you do, you're always going to end up with at least one side that's on the bias. And that's the other challenge I have with triangles, is that bias edge stretches so much. And, you know, if you're not working with it very carefully, you could just end up with stuff that just doesn't fit together because, you know, that bias edge. So there are many tricks and tips for working with half square triangles, and, you know, the quilting industry has lots of methods. You know, I like ones where you start with a square and trim the corner off. And I always find more uses for those, but yeah, you can end up with lots of little bits and pieces that kind of don't fit together. So Florence Pettit, I had mentioned as we started the book that she wrote some other books, and I got my hands on 2 of them besides this one. So I now have the Indigo one, and I think I might start reading that one on my own, just for my own scholarship. But you know what? If it gets to be riveting, I will consider, you know, reading it here. And then the other book, if you follow me on Instagram, you may have noticed I posted it on Instagram. It is the most delightful book, and it's about printing using erasers, you know, like carve eraser printing. And you can't get more simple than that unless you like carve potatoes. Like, I think that it's like the next step up from literally using things like that to carve. So, all right, come on, Druid. You know that things that I find riveting, probably the rest of the universe is like, Stephanie, what is wrong with you? So I realized that it has to reach a certain point for us to read about it online, or I would never have any friends. But anyway, so I wanted to mention that because her stamp book, the Indigo book, is actually, I don't know if it did not have a great print run or what. It's actually hard to find. I lucked into a charity that was selling a copy of it for an affordable price. Otherwise, the book is like $60, $70, $80, $100. But I found a cheaper version of it. It doesn't have the dust jacket, but in any event, Florence Pettit, even though she's not like the household name that some of these other writers are, I think she really knew what she was talking about. She did good research. And it seems like she's kind of a delightful person. In flipping through that stamp book, you know, just the little tips and tricks she gives, and things like one of the printing projects is are bookmarks, very simple thing, you know, and she shows how you can cut your own letters or you can use these pre-made letter stamps. And the things on the bookmarks are things like, you know, Mary has made it to this place in the book, you know, like it was really cute stuff. So I just feel like she was a real character, and you know, she might have been a cool person to know. So without further ado, we are reading America's Printed and Painted Fabrics, 1600 to 1900. I always forget that last little part. So 1600 to 1900, by Florence Pettit, and it was published in 1970. I think I mentioned last week that, I don't know if it was Barbara Brackman or there was somebody's blog I was reading. There's not a whole lot about Florence Pettit out there. You know, the way some of the other writers, you can find lots of info about them. Not as much stuff out there about Florence Pettit, but somebody had reported that she'd written this book in the 50s, and that's not true. She wrote this book in 1970. It was published in 70. This is not a reprint. So, we are on, I think we're still in the first chapter. How do they print fabric? And we left off at stenciling, so that's where we're going to go. Let me, before I forget, grab the pictures. And, you know what, I forgot, you guys. All this stuff is in crazy order. I need to go in and reorder everything. But let's see if I can find this one. Here it is, I think. Okay. Sadly, these are all in black and white. There are a few color pictures in here, though, I think. Yeah, there's a handful of color pictures in here. So this is what we have to look at. This is a quilt made by Frances Newberry of Gales Ferry, Connecticut, circa 1850, stenciled in red and green, courtesy of the Lyman Allen Museum, New London, Connecticut. So these are painted. This is not stitched. So this is painted or stenciled. So without further ado, this is chapter 1, and we are now on a later part. We've gone through several parts, but this is stenciling. The process of applying colors by hand through openings cut in parchment, paper, or metal stencils is a very ancient but now little used method of fabric decoration. The design is drawn, then traced onto the stencil material, and the areas of the pattern to be colored are cut away, leaving parts of the stencil where the cloth must be shielded from the color. Small ties must be left to hold the stencil together, and these appear as spaces between units on the cloth and give the design its characteristic look. So what she's talking about is like, you know, if you have stencils of letters, so think about like a B, like the letter B has the, or even A has that cutout in the middle, and so you'd have to shield the fabric or whatever you're stenciling with that, you know, that cutout in the middle, but you don't want it like as a separate piece. So it's got to have those little pieces that, you know, kind of hold it to the rest of the letter. So that's what she's talking about, these little ties. A separate stencil must be cut for each color in a design, and dye or color is simply painted on through the openings. If you've ever stenciled before, you know that it's best to use a proper tool for that. So they're like a stencil brush or like something like a balled up fabric that you can kind of dab it with, because you don't really paint. It's more of a dabbing. Early Japanese stencils are probably the masterpieces of the art and were used also as a guide for painting on resist wax or paste. Oriental craftsmen sometimes cut two identical paper stencils and glued hair or silk threads between them to hold the whole together and act as ties. I'm not exactly sure what she's saying here. Yeah, you're right. Something blunt. A dauber. Absolutely. I'm not sure what she means by these with the hairs. I guess maybe what she's saying is they're so fine, I guess, and then they're actually using hair to like hold those pieces together. I don't know. Combinations of hand painting and stencil dyeing achieved very detailed patterns. Early American stenciled fabrics are rare because there were comparatively few of them, and they were made at home and were not produced commercially. The stenciled counterpanes and coverlets can be identified by the small spaces dividing parts of the design, and by the barely perceptible fact that color is sometimes more intense around the edges of a shape where it touched the edge of the stencil. And I think that probably means like it kind of gathers there. Sort of bleeds and gathers there, maybe. Or I guess bumping up against the edge. It's not really bleeding, it's kind of bumping against the edge of the stencil. It is difficult to distinguish between some early block prints and stencil prints. Some museums and historical societies have in their collection a few charming examples of coverlets, and there are to be found many of those Victorian delicacies called theorem paintings. Now, theorem paintings are a whole other thing altogether, but, well, let me read what she says next. It kind of explains them. These were done on a velvet or satin made partly with stencils, then framed for parlor walls. So what these were is, so like the velvet, like it would take, I think sometimes they actually even used like a dry color. It wasn't actually even paint. It was like a dry color. And especially on the velvet, and they could put a stencil down and say like you're drawing grapes, you know, how like you have a round stencil. And the way that you did the color, you could like have the color like very dark on the outside and then have it sort of fade to the center. So it gives it this sense of like shape, of like rounding. My mother actually took a class in this when I was a kid, and I remember being fascinated by it. You know, she took toll painting, she took theorem painting, all kinds of stuff. So, but generally I think in the Victorian period, theorem painting was something that like upper class ladies who, you know, they had lots of hobbies, and theorem painting was one of them. 20th century silk screen printing, the method by which most hand-printed fabrics are done now, is nothing more than a refinement of stencil printing. The stencil is now a plastic or lacquer film instead of paper, and it is stuck to a fine silk that holds the stencil together and eliminates the ties. The color is pushed through the silkscreen stencil with a rubber squeegee instead of being brushed on. This has developed into a very precise method, but has great flexibility and is used in many ways for fabric printing and also for fine art prints called serigraphs. So before I move on to the next thing, kind of interesting because you think about t-shirts. I'm wearing one. Silk screening for t-shirts has been around for quite some time, and really until pretty recently it was a consistent technique. You know, I think technologically, like the screens maybe were a little different. The process where you actually have to, like, this emulsion that you use and you burn it out with like a light, like UV light and all this stuff, like the process has, you know, gradually changed. But it had a long history, screen printing. It wasn't until very recently, I think, and I would have to do a little research to confirm this, but you may have seen commercials more recently about, and they make a joke of it because it's DTF, which, the lingo of the young, you might know what that means. But what it means in the sense of textile printing is, I think it's direct to film. So essentially what it is it's a type of printing where they can put down this color, and it's like a film thing, and it's almost like kind of like the stuff that they're using now with like the Cricut machines. And so literally, like, this film, they put this film down on the t-shirts, like they don't even have to use like, and then I think it's heat adhered. They don't even have to use like the squeegee and the ink and all that stuff. This direct to film, I think, or direct to fabric, direct to film. I can't remember what the DT and F are. But it is a newer technology that kind of is like the next step beyond silkscreen. So, you know, we have digital printing as well. Like, you know, that also has been around for a minute. But yeah, I really think that it's been products, you know, you can get these print on demand products now. Yes, direct to film printing. Okay, I was right. So popular textile customization method where design is digitally printed on a special film, coated with adhesive, cured, and then heat pressed directly into the garment. Yep, that's what it is. So that is actually a pretty new technology. So it's really interesting. I mean, if you think about the history of silkscreen t-shirts, like, I mean, I don't know when the first silkscreen t-shirt was created, but, you know, it probably goes back pretty long. And that's what we worked with until pretty recently. Isn't that interesting? Like, it's just, I don't know. Something you kind of take for granted, and then like all of a sudden it's totally different. So, okay. The next technique to talk about is batik. And let's see if the next picture is actually the picture that goes with this. It is! Yay! They were going to run into some trouble with these pictures if I don't fix the order that they show up in. So this is the detail of the corner of a Javanese batik circa 1780, printed on fine cotton and used as a sarong. So that's pretty cool. Man, I would wear a sarong like that. That is cool. I really like this. All these different animals, like baboons or monkeys or something, lions, fierce lions, deer, a rooster. Oh, there's a little elephant, little elephants. People with horses. Oh, is this a cat? I don't know what this is. Something in a tree. Peacock. That's a very cool looking peacock. Oh, and even like little things that maybe are like lizards or insects or something. Oh, very cool. I love this. Okay. So batik. This is technically not a printing process, but rather a painstaking method of dyeing cloth in a pattern after painting it with wax. It was done originally in the Orient, particularly in Java, and it has been revived briefly at various times in other countries, and is probably the original resist printing. The design is drawn or lightly traced on the cloth, or followed from a drawing that can be seen through a fine cotton or silk. Hot liquid beeswax is trailed on from a tool called, and I have never known the actual pronunciation, so I do my best, and I'm sorry if it's wrong, but ajanting. And the way it's spelled is Tjanting. And I actually have one. I should probably go dig it out, but it's like, it's a wooden handle. It kind of looks, like a sort of a chunky paintbrush handle, big wooden handle. And then it's like a piece of brass that has been kind of folded into almost like a little pot. And it's like either welded or the seam is folded in so that it kind of is, the bottom of it is locked. And then the top of it is open, so you could stuff the beeswax in there. And then the bottom, where it's been, welded or otherwise, contained, there's like a little nozzle. And it's, it's almost like just a little round bit. Like, so just a little bit can come out of the wax. And then this whole thing is then fitted almost like with a ferrule, like a pencil, onto this wooden handle. And so then you would put the beeswax in and you hold it over, a fire or, a flame. And then when you introduce it to your fabric, you hold it like this and you introduce it to your fabric, and the tip is supposed to then cause the beeswax, as the tip touches the fabric, cause the beeswax to flow out. I think that the tools that the really good Javanese artisans were using were probably much nicer than the one I have, because, okay, it's pronounced chanting. Okay, thank you. The initial TJ is pronounced like a CH. Okay. And hat. Okay, chanting. Awesome. Thank you, Druid. So yeah, a chanting or a canting tool. Traditional Indonesian pen-like instrument. Yep. Heat retaining copper or brass. Fine spout. Yep. Wooden or hand. Yep. Yeah, I'll have to go dig mine out. I think I know where it is. It was from college. When I was in college, we had to, get all these tools and things, and I did not enjoy it. It's very tedious to try and trace, resist. It's a thing. Okay. So she describes it just as I have. So she says, this is so hot liquid beeswax is trailed on from a tool called a chanting. This is a small metal cup on a handle with a hollow copper tube running to the tip and serving as the applicator of the liquid wax. She makes it sound more complex than it is. It's really not. Like, I mean, she makes it sound like a tube. Again, it's like a little spout. It's like the metal is bent and curved and welded together, and it's just like a little spout in the metal. It's not like it's a whole bunch of different pieces. She says the cup is dipped into the pot of melted wax and refilled as needed for more drawing. They could also put bits of beeswax in there and hold the thing over the heat. It's not, I don't think it's always like dipping it out. I think they could also like kind of hold it over the heat to melt the wax, like kind of keep the wax molten. Large areas that must be protected to resist the dye may be painted with a brush dipped into the hot wax. So they also do that. The wax cools and hardens and thus makes the painted parts resistant to the subsequent cool dye bath. To add more colors, the first wax is left on if needed or melted off after the first dyeing. And that's the part that gets me, is sometimes based on the way they want to build up color in these dyes, in these dye baths, they sometimes would have to mask out, like, say, a background. So as an example, we looked the other day at the those basic indigo ones. So you'd mask out the part that you want to stay white, and then you do the first dip dye for the light blue, and then you mask out what you want to stay light blue, and then you dip dye again to get a darker blue. Sometimes with these type of things, you have to, like, you may want your background to be a color that cannot overlap with any other color. So you have to mask that out. But then you have to go in and mask out other stuff and unmask the background. And they would do this different ways. They'd sometimes boil the cloth to get the wax out. I think that's kind of like the starting path, is to boil it. And then they would also use other ways of like sort of layering it with like blotting cloths and using heat to absorb the wax out of the fabric. It is tedious as hell, and I have so much respect for these artisans, and the fact that they were doing this like way back in antiquity, and making beautiful things like this. I can't even I can't even wrap my head around it. And I had, when I was in college and I was taking a lot of these textile technique classes, I had access to stuff that was, far more advanced. For instance, silk painting. You use a resistant silk painting that is, it's water soluble, kind of. I'm trying to think what you use to get it out. I think it's like you have to wash it out with soap. It's like water doesn't budge it, but if you add soap, then it'll wash out. And then you'd use like a little bottle with a needle tip to draw that resist on, and you would think that would be easy. It is not. And I'm talking about something that's a teeny tiny little itty bitty needle nozzle and a free flowing liquid that stays liquid. And you're not worried about like, oh, the wax has gotten cold, I have to heat it up again. You're talking about something, and you can squeeze the bottle to make the resist come out. So much easier, you would think, but not. So like, again, I cannot overstate how fascinating these things are and how much work goes into it that you really don't realize until you see the process. Okay, so to add more colors, the first wax is left on if needed or melted off. More protective wax painting, dyeing, wax removal, and final washing follow. The wax can be cracked purposefully or may crack slightly in handling. And when dye penetrates the cloth through these tiny cracks, the batik takes on its characteristic crackled look. The Japanese also did block prints using wax printed from the block on the cloth instead of painting it on. Such blocks were called chaps, and the fabrics were called chap batiks. And so this is spelled TJAP. So I guess that's chaps. I guess that's how that's pronounced, based on the chanting. I will never get that right, I'm sure. They were done more rapidly and could thus be produced in greater quantity. Batiks are rarely done today. Okay, so this is 1970. Batiks are frequently done today. But I think today we have two different things going on with batik, and I'll talk about that in a second. So batiks are rarely done today, except as fine art hangings on silk or very fine cotton, and are seen occasionally in contemporary art exhibitions. Some have been commissioned as church hangings. They enjoyed a short revival during the Art Nouveau period about 1900 and are now sometimes imitated in roller prints, deceptively called batiks. So that's kind of the point there, is that today we certainly have a batik market. I am totally blanking right now on what company it is that produces and distributes the batiks. There's one particular company. I will think of it right after the stream is done. It will literally be the second I hit stop streaming, I will remember it. But if you're a quilter and you like batiks, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But those batiks are, I think what they have is the company has some kind of like relationship with some, actual Indonesian batik artisans. Chap. Okay. Thank you, Druid. Druid is my linguistics. You're my savior in linguistics. You have much better skills than I do in this. But anyway, I think that the text. Okay, so Hoffman. Okay, Hoffman's what I'm thinking of. I think. No. Island Batik. Island Batik is the one that I can think of. That is the one I think that does the. I think they're the one that has those like. They have a very wide range of batiks, and I think those are kind of like the real deal. You will find that they are sometimes the fabric is thinner, like it's a thinner. It's more like a sheeting, So it's very smooth and kind of lighter weight, but it is very tightly woven. And it can be an absolute nightmare to sew with. I have tried some hand sewing on batiks, and it's a little bit more challenging than just your regular stitching. It can be kind of mean to your sewing machine. I want to say that quilters that I've talked to that regularly use batiks, they typically use like a finer, sharper needle. And I apologize, I can't say what that is because I really don't know. But then there's also these sort of faux batiking. And in some cases, I'm not saying that Hoffman and Robert Kaufman do this because I don't know. But I do think some of these companies have a printed, just like she says, a roller printed batik. And it looks very convincing. But if you really, really look at it, you can kind of tell it's not the real deal. Real batik fabrics just have a quality about them. I think that, when you've seen them, you can kind of tell the difference. So yeah, I actually have a package of batiks I bought probably 20 years ago, and I know exactly where they are. They are sitting in my my fabric stash, and about once a year I see them and I think I'm going to do something with these finally, and then I never do. I don't, I don't have any other batiks in my fabric stash anymore. Because I don't love it. I don't love them. And I think it's part of it is the difficulty in working with them because again, they're just not the same as regular quilting fabric. The fabric itself just has a different hand to it, and it can be challenging sometimes. Microtex. Thank you, Druid. Druid's on it today. Microtex Sharp. Yeah. So very thin, sharp. Yeah. Yep. Thank you for posting that. So Microtex. Alrighty. So, seldom used hand processes. The process of tie-dye, the name of which almost explains itself and already mentioned under resist printing, is familiar to many from school days. Portions of a piece of cloth are gathered up and tied tightly with waxed string. Then part or all of the cloth is dipped into dye, which cannot penetrate the tied portions. Early Peruvians tied pebbles into the cloth with waxed string in regular patterns, which resulted in tiny white circles on a dyed background. In India, tie-dye was called bandana work, from the Hindu word bandana, which means to tie. And the word is spelled just like a bandana, like what we would say in English. but it's got an H in it. So it's Bhandana. It maybe is not pronounced exactly like bandana, but I'm going to go ahead and say it is. But so that's interesting. I did not know. I knew the term bandana was probably like from some Sanskrit or Hindu or something, but I didn't realize it means to tie. So totally makes sense. The method is still used in India and the Orient, sometimes in fine, complicated designs done by tying the cloth around a pattern of pegs or pins set into a board using sheer cottons and silks for clothing and scarves. The Japanese did carefully controlled tie and dye and combined it with stenciling and embroidery on silks for robes. On paper, they achieve a similar effect by multiple folding and dipping the edges into dye. Now, I am not seeing here... Okay, this surprises me. So, the Japanese technique is actually called shibori. Shibori? Which also, I think, is the Japanese term for to tie. Shibari, I think, is the ropes thing, the S&M ropes thing. Same Japanese thing too, as well. But the Japanese stuff, and it's interesting. They have this. She has this picture, and this is one area where I do. Okay, so this one. I'm sorry, I forgot to move to this one. So this is a contemporary batik on silk with trailed wax design on a background dyed golden green, made by artist Bernie Gorski. So yeah, that's interesting. Okay, this she's saying is Peruvian, cotton printed by tie-dye method in dark red on white cloth. Oh, it's red. I don't know why in my mind I'm thinking indigo. So Peru, circa 1400, and this is from the Cooper Hewitt. You can find stuff like this in Ghana, in blue. They have a pretty major indigo manufacturer in Ghana, and the fabric looks a lot like this, and they do it the exact same way. It's really interesting to me that, there's a lot of these techniques that global trade routes could be responsible for some of it, with textiles being major trade items throughout antiquity. And you could definitely see populations, coming into contact with something through trade, or, even when, colonialism and such, when areas are taken over, and adapting some process that they already have to that new thing. But I also, it's always so interesting to me when, you look at, okay, so Peru, pretty far away from Japan, also pretty far away from Ghana. Yet all three of these places developed a type of dyeing that was really similar. And in fact, if this was blue, she's saying it's red, so I think it would be easier to recognize that it's not. But I think if this was blue and white, you might be hard pressed unless you had some more expert experience to distinguish it from one of the other countries that produce similar things. So I just think it's really interesting, and it's just one of those things that I always wonder about. Like, why do we have pyramids all over the world in these different, cultural communities that never had contact with each other, and why do we have, other things like, and, I really do think textile work is another one of those, it's an industry, it's a skill. And, from reading Women's Work, 20,000 Years, that really told me a lot, the first 20,000 years, because she talks about weaving and, these different places where weaving has been found. And it's kind of like, well, how did all of these different ancient civilizations all kind of come up with similar methodology? Sometimes that happens, but sometimes I sort of wonder, like, were they ancient aliens? Like, and then that's when you guys go, okay, I'm done with you, Stephanie. Click off. So anyway, I was babbling, moving right along. Let's see. Painting with a brush and dye or oil colors on fabric is distinguished mainly by its variety over the years. It probably reached its height of excellence in the toile paints. Okay, so this is Peintes. And I think this is French. Toile is French. Toile paints of, paints of India early in the 17th century, in which the whole design of a very large panel was sometimes painted, resist dyed with mordants, and also painted with dyes. And if you are following along with me and Jill in our reading of Roderick Hirakov's book, you probably would recognize what she's talking about are Indian palmpours, I'm pretty sure. Because those are those big tapestries meant to be hung on walls. They have the tree of life at the center generally, and they are painted and all kinds of other techniques. They're very detailed, like insanely detailed. And it makes sense that what she's describing here would be how those are made. North American Plains Indians made some handsome paintings on animal hides by incising or burning the drawing and adding the painting by hand with earth and vegetable colors. And we actually have a picture too that I'll get to in a second. Painting by hand on fabrics is done on an almost negligible scale in the 20th century. Textile dyes or oil colors are sometimes used to decorate clothing and accessories on two widely disparate scenes: the primary school grades and the ateliers of haute couture. That's funny. So Joed says, I think we had modern technology before, perhaps several times, and it was lost. I think these monuments have something to do with that. Yeah. Losing paper trails concerns me greatly. If everything becomes digital, what records do we have? Yes. It is something that I think about a lot. Yeah. So paper is, of course, paper trails are, of course, in danger of becoming lost as well. They are, fire and, just deterioration. Paper stuff deteriorates. And being so digitally focused today, is great because the stuff is there. It is supposedly there. It's safe. It's forever. It can be shared easily, but it also has to be maintained, and the technologies themselves have to be, concerned. And so, like, what do we do with the stuff that we maybe saved to floppy disks back in the 90s? You have to keep the technology that can read that, right? Yeah. And I believe that is one reason why the Hebrews wrote the Torah. Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of concerns, certainly, about, maintaining things. And, there is a push in some cases in, like, some environments, collections and things, to digitize and then get rid of the original paper. Because paper has a lot of problems with it. Not only does the fact that it deteriorates on its own, it is vulnerable to, pests and floods and fire and all that. It's just, it's like, what do you do? Right? So yeah, let's see, where are we at? So the next thing up is machine printing processes. So I think I will get to that next time. But I want to show you this last picture that was in this chapter. So we've got this lovely tie-dye here. A silk scarf tie-dye design in mauve. Mauve and white, showing a simple, typical pattern. That's Bernie Gorski. This is the small tied square of wool cloth, which has been tied and dyed once and is now ready for a second dyeing. Also Bernie Gorski. And then we have a Dakota woman and an, oh gosh, I always get this one wrong, Assiniboine, I think it's Assiniboine, girl wearing painted hides as robes from a painting by Carl Bodmer and it's from the Smithsonian. So you can see the painted, aspects of this and it sounds like, as she said, like incised or burned lines. So I think that's very interesting. And then it seems to me that her leggings are probably like that as well, although they could have been a cloth. They didn't necessarily have to be like an animal hide. So very interesting. The robes are a really interesting topic. That, you know, I have a book. It's the Dale Chihuly collection. Dale Chihuly, meaning the glass artist, the very famous glass artist. Believe it or not, he is a major Native American robes collector, and I have the book that has all these in it. It's really interesting. I have potentially an ancestor that ran a wool blanket company, and he made some of the robes for like the Wild West shows and stuff back in the late 1800s. That's like a whole very, in-depth and interesting kind of textile topic. I don't know that I will ever really go down that road, just because it's again, like, it's a very deep, very deep rabbit hole. But I had kind of started doing a little bit of research because I wanted to find out more about this potential ancestor of mine. I don't know how I'm related. I haven't done the genealogy to figure it out, but so we'll leave off there. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. If you have Assiniboine. Oh, where's the Assiniboine? I'm wondering, is the Assiniboine. Okay, so the what do you call it? The stress. The stress syllable is the first one. I'm terrible about pronunciation, guys. Languages are just not my thing, and I mean, like, I can write, but speaking, not so good. All right, so Saturday, if you're around Saturday, you have nothing to do, or if you're sewing or doing some housework or whatever you got going on and you need some company, Jill and I will be doing our bi-monthly Stitch and Glitch. So I hope to see you there. I think Jill's got some things to show off. We were talking about, we've got a bunch of stuff that we could potentially do, and there's a video we might watch, etc., etc. So if you've never joined us and you don't have anything to do, join us, because it's fun. Yeah, we have fun, and you never know what's going to happen. It's live. All right, so you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I will be back on Monday. So take care. Bye.